I was whistling away to myself as I arrived at the school. I knew all of the work over the next 2 days was being paid at time and a half, and I was fantasizing about all the extra money that I would be getting. I walked down the hallway until I reached the area where we were meant to be working. A recent earthquake had knocked down part of a wall, and we had been hired to fix it as quickly and efficiently as possible. Unsurprisingly, I was the first one to arrive, as most of the others were probably annoyed that we had work on the weekend. I was about to start work when I noticed a light shining through the hole in the wall. I carefully moved forward and peered through. I was stunned to see there was a door hidden inside of here. Curiosity got the best of me, and I reached forward and tried the handle, and it turned in my grasp. I looked from side to side and saw the school was still deserted. My curiosity got the best of me as I climbed through the wall and into the room that was hidden inside. I let out a gasp as I stood up to discover a classroom that still looked immaculate. The room was lined with desks, with mannequins sitting at each one. I carefully made my way towards the front of the room to a bookshelf that was lined with textbooks. They were over 50 years old, and most of their subject matter was outdated. I turned around to leave, but froze in place as I stared properly at what I had first assumed were mannequins. My blood ran cold as I stared into the faces of almost 24 children sitting there quietly. Their faces were split open into gigantic grins that showcased their rotting teeth and yellow tongues. I tried to fight back panic as I got the unnerving feeling they were reading my thoughts. My eyes were drawn to their fingernails, which were almost 3 inches long. I launched myself at the door in the hopes of escaping before they could get up. I stood there, twisting the door handle, but it refused to move in my grasp. I let out a shriek as something smashed into the wall inches from my head. I watched in wonder as a small piece of chalk rolled on the ground and landed beside my feet. My body suddenly began to turn around of its free will and began marching past the rows of children to the front of the classroom. I was hyperventilating as I slid to a halt in front of a blackboard that was covered in multiplication questions. I flinched away as a piece of chalk was placed into my hand. They began reciting 1 times 1 is 1, 2 times 2 is 4, while I tried my best to figure out how I could escape. They let out a collective sigh as I reached up and solved the first question. My hands were shaking uncontrollably, and I almost dropped the chalk, but I managed to answer it correctly. I moved on to the next question and had just finished writing it when I realized I made a mistake. I heard a voice whisper in my ear, "You need to wear the dunce cap." I was flung across the teacher's table by some unseen force as the smiling children watched on. I screamed in pain as one of my fingers was snapped off and rolled off the edge of the desk. I lay there sobbing as one of the children walked up and tied a dunce cap to the top of my head before sitting back down. It took me over 10 minutes to compose myself and go back to answering the questions. The once white chalk had turned crimson due to all my blood coating it. I was on the second to last question when I made another mistake. I could feel the happiness exuding from the children as another one of my fingers was ripped off. I finally managed to answer all of the questions and stood there, waiting to see what would happen. Their smiles began to widen even further, and I cringed away as they began clapping. Their long nails were clicking against each other with each clap. The door slowly opened, and I kept darting my eyes towards it. I mustered the courage and began walking towards it, all the while expecting them to attack me at any second. I reached the door and looked back to see them all sitting there, waving goodbye. I climbed out the wall to discover the rest of my team had arrived. They kept asking me what happened to me, but I was too traumatized to answer. I watched in horrified silence as they each climbed through the wall and disappeared from sight. I heard screams of terror from within, but it has gone silent now. I now sit here patiently waiting to see if any of them will come back out.